Not just any smell, a sharp, masculine cologne lingering on Sarah's scarf. It was Southwest out of place, so unfamiliar, that it felt like a slap in the face. Sarah had come home late the night before, claiming she was out with the girls. She gave me a quick peck on the cheek, said she was exhausted, and disappeared into the bathroom for nearly an hour. The next morning, when I picked up her scarf from the back of the dining chair, that cologne hit me like a freight train. At first, I brushed it off. Maybe someone hugged her. Maybe it was just some guy standing too close in line at the bar. But something about it stayed with me. It wasn't the smell itself, it was the way Sarah had acted. Avoiding eye contact. Rushing to bed. That nervous edge in her voice. I set the scarf down and tried to shake the thought. But once suspicion plants itself in your mind, it grows roots fast. Sarah started changing in ways that didn't make sense. First, it was the gym. She'd always been a casual gym goer, an hour here, a spin class there. But suddenly, she was going 6 days a week. And not just during the day. Sometimes, she'd leave at 9 p.m. and not come back until close to midnight. When I asked about it, she had answers ready. The gym's less crowded at night, or, I'm trying a new program, and it takes longer. But then there was her phone. She was glued to it. Every buzz, every ding would send her diving for it like it was about to self-destruct. She started keeping it face down on every surface, even in the bathroom. And when I casually asked why, she'd laugh it off or change the subject entirely. But the real turning point came during Ethan's soccer season. Ethan, our oldest, was on the local soccer team, and Sarah started volunteering to help out with practices and events. She was suddenly very interested in being involved. And wouldn't you know it, Coach Derek, the overly charismatic fitness buff with year-round 10 lines and an endless supply of sleeveless shirts, was leading the team. Now, Derek had always rubbed me the wrong way. He was charming, sure, but there was an arrogance about him. He made too much eye contact with Sarah. He lingered too long in conversations. And Sarah? She'd laugh at his jokes just a little too hard. But here's where things started to unravel. One Saturday after practice, I noticed Sarah had left her phone in her gym bag on the kitchen counter while she was upstairs with the kids. I wasn't snooping, I swear I wasn't. But the screen lit up with a notification. It wasn't a text. It was a calendar alert. I felt my chest tighten. Apartment 3B. What kind of self-care happens at an apartment? I didn't say anything that day. Instead, I waited. The following Tuesday, Sarah told me she was heading out to yoga. She kissed me goodbye, grabbed her gym bag, and left. 10 minutes later, I was in my car, headlights off, following her at a distance. She didn't drive to a yoga studio. She didn't even drive to the gym. Instead, she pulled into a dimly lit apartment complex on the other side of town. I parked far enough away to avoid suspicion but close enough to see her walk up to the second floor. Apartment 3B. She knocked, and a man opened the door. Derek. Shirtless. Smiling. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles went white. I wanted to charge up those stairs, bang on that door, and demand answers. But I didn't. Because if I was going to confront Sarah, I needed more than a hunch and an apartment number. I drove home and sat in the driveway for an hour, staring at the dashboard. A few days later, Sarah asked me to grab her water bottle from her car while she was making dinner. I opened the passenger door, and there it was, a men's hoodie stuffed under the seat. It smelled faintly of that same cologne from the scarf. And on the sleeve was a logo I'd seen before, Ethan's soccer team. Derek's hoodie. I felt like the universe was taunting me, dropping breadcrumbs at every turn. But still, I said nothing. Instead, I turned my focus to something else, the kids. A week later, Noah, our youngest, had a routine pediatric appointment. Nothing serious, just some standard tests. At the end of the visit, the doctor casually mentioned Noah's blood type, A negative. Now, here's the problem. I'm O positive. Sarah's B positive. Two parents with those blood types cannot have an A negative child. It's biologically impossible. I froze. The doctor didn't notice. Sarah didn't notice. But inside, it felt like everything around me was crumbling. If Noah wasn't mine, what about the other kids? That night, after everyone went to bed, I sat at the dining table with my laptop open. I ordered 5 DNA test kits. 5 swabs. 5 envelopes. 5 ticking time bombs. The process was agony. Swabbing each kid while they slept felt like a betrayal of everything I believed about myself as their father. But I had to know. 2 weeks later, the email arrived. Your results are ready. I locked myself in my car, parked at the far end of a grocery store parking lot, and opened each file one by one. Ethan, not the father. Mia, not the father. Liam, not the father. Emma, not the father. Noah, not the father. 5 results. 5 undeniable truths. I stared at those words for so long that the screen went dark. When I finally blinked, my vision was blurred, and my chest felt hollow. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I just sat there, completely still, as everything I thought I knew about my life dissolved in front of me. But after the shock came clarity. Sarah had been lying to me for over a decade. She had built an entire life on betrayal, and I had been walking through it like a blind man. But not anymore. I wasn't going to confront her in a fit of rage. I wasn't going to let her manipulate me into doubting what I knew was true. No, I was going to plan this carefully. Meticulously. Sarah thought she was untouchable. Thought she'd gotten away with it. But she was about to learn exactly how wrong she was. I didn't sleep that night. After reading those results, I sat in my car for hours, staring at the dashboard. 5 kids. 5 names. 5 little people I'd poured my heart, time, and energy into. And not one of them was biologically mine. I couldn't process it. My mind kept bouncing between anger, heartbreak, and sheer disbelief. But here's the thing, I couldn't confront Sarah yet. Not until I had more. More clarity, more answers, more control over myself. If I walked into that house now, waving DNA results around like some courtroom drama, she'd twist it. She'd cry, she'd lie, and somehow, I'd end up apologizing to her. So I went inside, kissed the kids goodnight, and climbed into bed next to the woman who had managed to build an empire of lies around me without so much as a crack showing. The next morning, Sarah acted as if nothing was wrong. She made coffee, packed the kids' lunches, and kissed me on the cheek before heading out to yoga. Watching her move around the kitchen so effortlessly made my stomach turn. How do you lie so easily to someone you've shared over a decade with? I realized something crucial, Sarah was good at this. Too good. If I wanted the truth, the full truth, I'd have to be smarter. For the next week, I acted completely normal. I smiled, I joked, I hugged her like I always did. Meanwhile, I started watching her closely. Not like in movies where the guy hides in closets with night vision goggles, no, I just noticed things. Every Tuesday and Thursday, Sarah left for her yoga sessions at the same time. Always the same gym bag, the same routine. She'd come home with perfect hair and untouched makeup, claiming she'd just finished an intense workout. But one evening, after she came back from yoga, I made a joke. I said something about how she must be the only person who can spend 2 hours working out and still look like she stepped out of a beauty commercial. She froze for half a second before laughing it off. But that half second. It told me everything I needed to know. The following Thursday, I decided to follow her again. This time, I didn't park far away or try to be sneaky, I parked right across the street from the apartment complex. If she saw me, fine. I didn't care anymore. I watched her climb the stairs and knock on the door to apartment 3B. Derek opened it. Same smug smile, same gym shorts, and, unbelievably, a backwards cap. Like he was trying out for a reality dating show. The door closed behind them, and I sat there, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. This time, I didn't drive away. I didn't need any more clues or hints, I had everything I needed. But I wasn't going to storm in. No. I wanted this to end on my terms. I went home, poured myself a cup of coffee, and started planning. Sarah was predictable. Every Tuesday and Thursday, she followed the same routine. The next week, on a Tuesday, I told Sarah I had a work trip out of town. I even packed a bag, left the house, and drove to a diner 2 towns over. I sat there for hours, sipping coffee and scrolling through my phone until I knew she was safely parked in front of Derek's apartment again. Then I drove straight there. Her car was parked outside, her gym bag still in the front seat. I walked up the stairs, took a deep breath, and knocked on the door. Derek answered, his usual smug grin fading the second he saw me. Behind him, Sarah froze on the couch, wearing leggings and an oversized hoodie, probably Derek's. Her face went pale, and she looked like she'd just seen a ghost. For a moment, none of us spoke. The silence hung in the air, thick and heavy. Finally, Sarah stammered out something about how they were just talking and how I shouldn't overreact. Talking. In his apartment. With the door locked. On a Tuesday evening. I stayed calm. Too calm. I said I wasn't here to argue or make a scene, I just wanted to know the truth. The full truth. Sarah hesitated. Derek looked uncomfortable, like he wanted to melt into the carpet. And then Sarah started crying. Not the quiet, remorseful crying you'd expect from someone caught in the act, no, this was theatrical. Full on, hands over the face sobbing, paired with incoherent mumbling about how I didn't understand, and how things just happened. I didn't buy it. I turned to Derek and asked him point blank, how long has this been going on? He couldn't look me in the eye. Instead, he mumbled something about a couple of years. A couple of years. All the pieces clicked into place. The late nights, the unexplained absences, the cologne, the blood types. It all led here, to apartment 3B and Derek, the gym rat soccer coach. I left without saying another word. I walked out of that apartment, drove to a quiet spot by the lake, and just sat there. It felt like every memory, every shared laugh, every family moment had been retroactively tainted. How many times had she looked me in the eyes and told me she loved me while living this double life? How many times had I played with the kids in the backyard, believing I was their father? But here's the thing, I realized something important sitting there in my car, I wasn't going to let her take anything else from me. Not my dignity, not my sanity, and certainly not my chance to move forward. Sarah thought she'd always be in control. She thought she'd be able to cry, manipulate, and guilt her way out of this. But no. This was the moment everything turned. I was done being the fool in her story. When I went home that night, I didn't say anything to Sarah. I didn't need to. She knew I knew. And the silence between us was louder than any argument could have been. But the next morning, while she was busy making breakfast and pretending everything was fine, I was meeting with a lawyer. This wasn't just about betrayal anymore, it was about consequences. And Sarah was about to face every single one of them. When I walked back into the house that night, Sarah was already in bed, pretending to be asleep. The air between us felt heavy, like it was filled with unspoken words and sharp edges. I lay down next to her, staring at the ceiling, and realized something, this wasn't going to end quietly. The next morning, Sarah acted like everything was fine. She made coffee, hummed a tune while cooking breakfast, and even kissed me on the cheek before helping Noah put on his shoes. She was too cheerful, too rehearsed. It was like watching someone play a character in a stage play where the audience already knew the plot twist. I waited until the kids were off to school. The door clicked shut, and the house went silent. Sarah turned around, still holding her coffee mug, and gave me that tight-lipped smile she always used when she was trying to get out of something. That's when I said it. I told her I knew everything. The late nights, the apartment visits, Derek, the DNA tests, the whole story. Her face changed instantly. The fake smile disappeared, her eyes went wide, and for one brief moment, she looked genuinely scared. But it didn't last long. Sarah was good at this. She had years of experience. She sighed, rolled her eyes, and said I was overreacting. Overreacting. As if finding out you'd raised 5 kids that weren't yours was something you could just brush off with a little deep breathing and some chamomile tea. When she realized I wasn't budging, she shifted gears. Tears. Big, dramatic ones. She sat down at the kitchen table, head in her hands, sobbing about how things just happened, and how she never meant for any of this to hurt me. But here's the thing, Sarah wasn't crying because she was sorry. She was crying because she got caught. I stayed calm. I didn't yell, I didn't bang on the table, and I certainly didn't let her turn this into a scene where she played the victim. I asked her one question, why? At first, she wouldn't answer. She just kept mumbling about how complicated everything was and how I wouldn't understand. But when I pushed, she finally snapped. She said our marriage had become boring. That I wasn't emotionally available. That Derek made her feel wanted again. And there it was, the blame. Somehow, her decade-long deception and the 5 children she passed off as mine were suddenly my fault. I couldn't believe it. I actually laughed out loud, and for a moment, Sarah looked taken aback. I told her she was unbelievable. That no matter what I had or hadn't done in our marriage, it didn't justify what she had done. But Sarah wasn't done yet. She went on a full-scale offensive. She started listing off every tiny thing I'd ever done wrong. Forgot an anniversary once. Apparently, that justified the first affair. Worked overtime to pay for our mortgage and kids' school fees. Well, according to her, that meant I wasn't present enough. At one point, she even said I should be grateful that I got to raise those kids because biology doesn't make a father. Grateful. I felt my chest tighten. I had given everything to those kids. Every late-night bottle feeding, every scraped knee, every tearful pep talk before a school presentation, I had been there. And now she was throwing it back in my face like it was some kind of consolation prize. But Sarah wasn't finished. She started pacing the kitchen, arms crossed, muttering about how I'd probably tell everyone and ruin her life. How she'd lose her friends, her reputation, and everything else she cared about. That's when it hit me, she wasn't worried about the kids, or me, or our marriage. She was worried about herself. And honestly, that stung more than anything else. I sat down at the kitchen table and told her, calmly, that I wasn't going to let her spin this into my fault. That I wasn't going to let her guilt-trip me into keeping quiet or sticking around for appearance's sake. Sarah's face hardened. The tears dried up, and her voice went ice-cold. She said if I left, I'd be the one destroying our family. That the kids would grow up blaming me for breaking up their home. For a second, I almost believed her. That's how good she was at this. But then I remembered the truth, the blood tests, the apartment visits, the hoodie under the seat, and the smell of another man's cologne on her scarf. I wasn't the villain in this story, no matter how hard she tried to make me one. The argument dragged on for hours. It wasn't even an argument by the end, it was just 2 people standing in the ruins of a marriage, trying to salvage something that couldn't be saved. At one point, Sarah stopped pretending to cry. She stopped trying to make excuses. She just sat across from me, arms folded, with a look on her face that I'll never forget. It was the look of someone who knew the game was over but refused to admit defeat. I told her I wanted a divorce. She didn't flinch. Didn't gasp. Didn't try to stop me. She just nodded slowly and said, fine. But before I walked out of that kitchen, she said one last thing. She said I'd never be able to walk away from the kids. That no matter what the test said, they'd always see me as their father. And you know what? She was right. Those kids weren't responsible for any of this. They didn't ask to be caught in the middle of their mother's mess. And no matter how much pain Sarah had caused me, those kids would always be mine, maybe not biologically, but in every other way that mattered. I told Sarah we'd figure out the logistics soon. Then I grabbed my jacket, walked out the door, and took the longest drive of my life. The next chapter wasn't going to be easy. There were lawyers to call, custody agreements to draft, and 5 innocent kids who needed to be protected from the mess their mother had made. But one thing was clear, this marriage was over. And Sarah? She was finally going to face the consequences of her choices. I spent the next few days in a fog. I couldn't eat, I couldn't sleep, and every time I closed my eyes, I saw Sarah's face, smiling, laughing, lying. I'd pick up one of the kids' toys, or hear their voices calling me Dad, and it felt like a knife twisting in my chest. But in between those waves of anger and heartbreak, one thought kept bubbling to the surface: she doesn't get to walk away from this unscathed. Now, I'm not a vengeful person by nature. I'm the guy who shrugs off insults, avoids confrontation, and tries to keep the peace. But Sarah had taken everything from me, my trust, my marriage, and even the foundation of my family. I wasn't going to scream, I wasn't going to punch walls, and I definitely wasn't going to let her paint me as the villain in her story. No, this was going to be surgical. Thoughtful. Deliberate. I didn't want revenge just for the sake of revenge. I wanted clarity, justice, and a little bit of poetic irony. I wanted Sarah to understand, deeply and painfully, what she had done. And most importantly, I wanted to make sure the kids were protected from the fallout. But where do you even start with something like this? I'll tell you where, in your lawyer's office. The first thing I did was meet with a divorce attorney. I walked in, sat down across from a woman named Linda, and spilled everything, the DNA tests, the apartment, Derek, the lies. Linda listened carefully, nodding at the right moments, and then she said something I wasn't expecting. You're in a stronger position than you think. It turns out, in our state, infidelity paired with financial dishonesty, oh, I'll get to that in a second, puts me in a very favorable spot in divorce proceedings. But here's where it got interesting. Sarah and I had a joint bank account, but she also had a separate account I wasn't supposed to know about. Let me back up. A week before I confronted Sarah, I had noticed a few strange charges on our bank statements, hotel rooms, restaurants across town, and even some payments to a random Venmo account. I brushed it off at first, thinking maybe they were mistakes, but when I dug deeper, I realized they all led back to one person, Derek. This wasn't just emotional betrayal, this was financial betrayal too. She had been siphoning money out of our shared finances to fund her little romance with Derek. When I told Linda about the separate account, she practically lit up. Apparently, hiding marital assets is a big deal in divorce cases. Now, with Linda handling the legal side, I turned my attention to the public side. See, Sarah was well liked in our social circle. PTA meetings, book clubs, neighborhood barbecues, she had a polished image as the perfect mom who had it all together. But it was all a facade. And while I wasn't about to air our dirty laundry in front of everyone like some daytime soap opera, I wasn't going to let her control the narrative either. So, I started planting seeds. Subtle ones. At Ethan's soccer game, one of the other moms asked me where Sarah was. I shrugged and said she was probably busy at Derek's place. I didn't elaborate. I didn't raise my voice. But I made sure the comment lingered. At a neighborhood barbecue, when someone complimented Sarah's dedication to the kids, I smiled and said, "Yeah, she's been really busy lately. Lots of late nights." Again, no details, just enough to make people curious. Word spreads fast in suburban circles, let me tell you. But the biggest part of my plan wasn't about Sarah's reputation, it was about the kids. I had to make sure they knew none of this was their fault. That no matter what happened between Sarah and me, I would always be there for them. So, I started spending more one-on-one time with each of them. Park visits, ice cream runs, helping with homework, it wasn't unusual behavior for me, but I made sure they felt safe, loved, and grounded. Because once everything hit the fan, I didn't want them feeling caught in the middle. The hardest part of planning this was keeping a straight face around Sarah. Every morning, she'd smile at me over her cup of coffee, make small talk about the weather, and pretend like we weren't living in a house of cards. I'd smile back, nod politely, and count down the days until everything came crashing down around her. But here's the thing, Sarah still thought she was in control. She still thought I was the same naive, trusting husband who'd let her walk all over me for years. One evening, while she was getting ready for one of her yoga sessions, she asked if I could pick up some groceries. I agreed, smiled, and kissed her on the forehead. And as she walked out the door, gym bag slung over her shoulder, I thought, you have no idea what's coming, do you? I wasn't just planning to confront her, I was planning to expose her. I started gathering evidence. Screenshots of her financial transactions, records of her fake self-care appointments, and every piece of damning proof I could find. I made copies of everything and handed them over to Linda. But there was one final piece I needed, the kids. I wasn't about to let Sarah manipulate them into thinking I was the villain here. So, I scheduled a family meeting. I told Sarah it was important, something we couldn't postpone. She looked nervous but agreed. The plan was set. Everything was lined up. the paperwork, the evidence, the confrontation, it was all ready. Sarah was about to find herself backed into a corner with nowhere left to hide. And the best part? She had no idea. But let me tell you something, I wasn't smiling anymore. This wasn't about revenge or making her miserable. This was about justice. About making sure she faced the consequences of everything she had done. When that family meeting finally happened, when Sarah sat across from me at the dining table with the kids quietly watching, I knew one thing for certain. This was the moment everything would change. I sat at the dining table, across from Sarah, with the kids quietly watching us. Their little faces were filled with confusion, their eyes darting between us as if they could sense the tension in the air. Sarah was fidgeting, her fingers wrapped tightly around her coffee mug, tapping lightly against the ceramic. She had no idea what was coming. But before I opened my mouth, before I began the final act of this tragic play, I thought about those 5 kids. None of this was their fault. They didn't ask for parents tangled in lies and betrayal. They didn't deserve to be pawns in whatever mess their mother had created. So I spoke carefully. I told them that sometimes grown-ups make mistakes, really big mistakes, and those mistakes can hurt people. I reassured them that I loved them, that I'd always love them, and that no matter what happened next, they'd be okay. Sarah sat there, stone-faced, trying to look composed, but her foot was bouncing nervously under the table. She knew something was off, but she was still confident she could talk her way out of whatever was coming. She couldn't. Because this wasn't about me confronting her in front of the kids. No, this was about setting the stage for something far bigger, something she couldn't manipulate her way out of with tears and excuses. Over the next week, while Sarah went about her routines as if nothing had changed, I was busy behind the scenes. Linda, my lawyer, had been working overtime, gathering evidence, preparing documents, and coordinating meetings. The financial discrepancies, the DNA results, the affair, it was all neatly packaged into a case file that could crack open the strongest facade. But I wasn't stopping there. Oh no. Sarah was about to be exposed in the most public, most unavoidable way possible. See, Sarah had spent years curating this image of herself as the perfect mother and devoted wife. PTA meetings, fundraisers, social media posts full of carefully staged family photos. She had built her reputation on a house of cards, and I was about to pull out the bottom one. I contacted the PTA president, a woman named Denise, who was also one of Sarah's closest friends. I didn't give her the full story, but I told her there were things about Sarah she deserved to know, things that would come out soon enough. Denise, being the community gossip hub that she was, took the bait immediately. Then I reached out to a few more key figures, parents from soccer practice, a couple of Sarah's mom friends, and even the principal of Ethan's school. Not in an aggressive way, not with accusations. Just enough hints, enough breadcrumbs, to make sure everyone was paying attention. Because here's the thing about secrets, they're only powerful when they're hidden. Once they're out in the open, they lose their grip. The court hearing was scheduled for the following month. It wasn't just a standard divorce case, it was a fraud case. Linda had built it around Sarah's financial dishonesty, her siphoning of marital assets, and the emotional damages caused by her decade-long deception. But the real twist. I made sure the hearing was public. This wasn't going to happen quietly behind closed doors, where Sarah could spin a sob story to a sympathetic judge. No, this was going to happen in a courtroom filled with people, neighbors, PTA moms, teachers, friends. I didn't have to invite anyone. Word spreads fast when drama like this is brewing. The morning of the hearing, Sarah still looked confident. She wore a tailored outfit, her hair was styled perfectly, and her makeup was flawless. But when she walked into the courtroom and saw who was sitting in the gallery, faces she recognized, faces she'd laughed with at school events, her confidence cracked. Linda was brilliant. She started with the financial records, showing every suspicious transaction, every Venmo payment to Derek, every hotel booking charged to our joint account. Sarah tried to interrupt, tried to claim it was all a misunderstanding, but Linda shut her down every time. Then came the DNA results. 5 separate envelopes. 5 separate truths. I could see Sarah's shoulders slump slightly as each one was presented. The carefully built narrative she had spent over a decade crafting was falling apart, piece by piece, under fluorescent courtroom lights and the murmurs of the people behind her. And then came the cherry on top, Derek himself. Turns out, Derek wasn't as loyal to Sarah as she thought. Linda had reached out to him weeks earlier, and with the right legal incentives, and the looming threat of being dragged into a financial fraud case himself, Derek spilled everything: dates, times, details. It was all there, neatly laid out for everyone to see. At one point, Sarah turned to me and tried to mouth something, maybe an apology, maybe a plea, but I looked away. I didn't want to hear it. The judge listened patiently, asked a few clarifying questions, and then delivered the verdict. Sarah was found guilty of financial misconduct, emotional harm, and breach of trust within the marriage. But the punishment wasn't just financial restitution, it was public. Sarah was ordered to issue a written apology to me and to the children. Not just privately, but publicly, on her social media platforms and in an email sent to the school community explaining her actions and taking responsibility. She was stripped of her volunteer roles, her PTA membership, and even her standing in some of her social circles. It wasn't jail time. It wasn't handcuffs. But for Sarah, who lived for appearances and approval, it might as well have been. In the days following the hearing, I stayed away from the chaos. I focused on the kids, on building a stable routine for them, on making sure they felt loved and protected. But Sarah? She couldn't escape it. Her apology letter went viral in our local community. People shared it, screenshotted it, and whispered about it at every school pickup and drop-off. Her carefully constructed image was gone. But here's the thing, it wasn't about humiliating her. It wasn't about revenge for revenge's sake. It was about accountability. It was about making sure she couldn't sweep this under the rug and move on like nothing had happened. Sarah had spent years building a life out of lies. She had hurt me, hurt our kids, and hurt everyone who had believed in her. This wasn't just about betrayal, it was about consequences. And when all was said and done, when the dust settled and the world moved on, I felt something I hadn't felt in months: peace. Because Sarah didn't just lose me. She lost the one thing she valued most, her carefully curated reputation.